The drone of David's laptop fan was the only consistent sound in his upscale suburban home, a relentless hum that mirrored the unceasing demands of his corporate life. Autumn 2023 in Seattle was a season of perpetual drizzle, mirroring the gray exhaustion that had settled deep within David's bones. He stared at the glowing screen, a mountain of spreadsheets mocking him, and then glanced at Buster, his golden retriever, who lay slumped by the door, tail barely thumping a rhythm of resigned boredom. David loved Buster fiercely, but the lawn. Hours at Synergy Solutions left him no time for proper walks. The dog needed more, deserved more, than hurried dashes around the block. His solution came in the form of a sleek, minimalist advertisement on a niche neighborhood forum. Invisible leash pet services, discreet, dedicated, divine. The service promised premium walks, customized to the pet's needs, without the owner ever seeing the walker. A novel concept, perhaps, but the glowing testimonials spoke of miraculously well-exercised, happier dogs, and the privacy appealed to David's introverted nature. He dismissed a fleeting unease about the invisible aspect. It was just a clever marketing gimmick, surely, for off-peak hours or highly discreet personnel. Desperate and willing to pay the hefty premium, he signed up. The first few days were, outwardly, a resounding success. Buster, usually sluggish after David's departure, for the office, greeted him at the door with a renewed vigor, his tail a blur, his eyes bright. His usual anxious chewing had stopped, and he seemed calmer, more content. David found perfectly clean, paw-shaped imprints on the welcome mat, indicating Buster had indeed been out. A subtle, earthy scent, like damp forest floor, clung to Buster's fur, far more invigorating than the usual city grime. David felt a wave of relief, a rare moment of peace amidst his relentless work schedule. One morning, however, as David rushed out the door, he noticed something odd. On the polished hardwood floor near the entryway was a faint trail of muddy paw prints. Not Buster's, which were always wiped clean by the service, but distinct, smaller, human-like prints, partially obscured, as if they belonged to someone stepping very lightly. They led from the front door, through the hallway, and disappeared. Near the kitchen. He dismissed it as Buster having tracked something in from his last walk. Though the dog's paws were usually spotless, the subtle anomalies continued. A faint, sweet scent, like decaying leaves mixed with something else, something metallic and cloying, began to permeate the house, especially near Buster's bed. David would sometimes catch faint whispers from the living room when he was alone, too indistinct to make out words, but unsettling in their presence. Once, he swore he saw a fleeting shadow dart across the hallway, just at the edge of his vision, but convinced himself it was just the house settling or his own exhaustion playing tricks on him. One evening, David was reviewing security camera footage on his phone, checking for a package delivery. He fast-forwarded to Buster's midday walk. The front door smoothly clicked open, then swung wide. Buster trotted out eagerly, but there was no one there. No human hand holding the leash, no visible figure accompanying him. Just Buster, seemingly. walking himself, yet his movements were oddly coordinated, as if pulled by an invisible tether. The leash itself, usually attached to his collar, simply floated in the air, taut, disappearing into empty space. David felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He dismissed the video as a glitch, a strange reflection, or even a clever special effect by the service. He reviewed it again and again, frame by agonizing frame, but the result was always the same. An unseen presence guiding his dog. He called the invisible leash service, but the line went straight to a generic voicemail. He tried the number listed on the forum. It was disconnected. A cold dread, sharp and insistent, began to prickle at the edges of his carefully constructed reality. That night, Buster seemed agitated. He whined softly, staring intently at the darkened hallway, his fur bristling slightly. David, now wide awake and unnerved, got up to investigate. As he stepped into the hallway, a soft, deliberate tap-tap echoed from the living room, like fingernails gently scratching against wood. Then, a low, guttural growl, too deep for any animal, vibrated through the floorboards, seemingly coming from just beneath the large area rug. The air in the room dropped several degrees, a sudden, unnatural chill that made David's breath mist, driven by a desperate need for answers. David knelt, pulling back the rug. There was nothing beneath it but polished wood. Yet, the growl intensified, seeming to emanate from the very air around him, thick with the cloying scent. A whisper, clear as a bell, brushed against his ear, so close he felt breath on his skin. Mine. Your friend ... mine. He scrambled backward, bumping into a large, ornate grandfather clock in the hallway. Its chime, usually a comforting sound, rang out with a distorted metallic clang, impossibly loud and mournful, seeming to echo with a strange internal resonance. As the final unsettling chime faded, the house plunged into absolute darkness. The power flickered, then died completely, leaving David enveloped in a suffocating blackness. Buster whimpered, pressing against his leg, his warmth the only solace in the sudden terrifying void. From the living room, the low growl intensified, accompanied by a new, wet, sucking sound, like something pulling itself across the floor. David fumbled for his phone, its screen stubbornly black. He was trapped alone, and whatever was taking Buster for walks was now inside his home. The abrupt plunge into absolute darkness was a physical assault. David stumbled, his heart hammering against his ribs, the air thick with the acrid scent of ozone and the cloying sweetness that was now undeniably the smell of decay. Buster, usually his brave companion, whined incessantly, pressing his shivering body against David's leg. The wet, dragging sound from the living room grew louder, more deliberate, accompanied by a new, unsettling slurping sound, as if something enormous was feeding in the darkness. David fumbled uselessly for his phone, its screen dead, his meticulously organized world reduced to a terrifying, formless void. As a cold, oppressive morning light seeped through the windows, revealing the chaos of the house, the true nightmare began. The dragging and slurping sounds ceased, replaced by a constant low thrumming that seemed to vibrate from the very foundation. a pulse that matched David's terrified heartbeat. Faint, skeletal scratch marks appeared on the walls just out of reach, and objects began to move. A photo frame shifted. A book fell from a shelf. A knife mysteriously appeared on the kitchen counter. The whispers intensified, weaving themselves into a cacophony of overlapping voices. Some pleading, some menacing, all utterly unintelligible, yet filled with a chilling, ancient malevolence. David scrambled for his laptop, his only remaining connection to the outside world. The screen glowed momentarily, displaying a single chilling message in a distorted font. Nitrogen monoxide signal, yours, here. The Wi-Fi icon showed a single flickering bar, then vanished. His landline, still plugged in, was dead. He raced to the front door, yanking on the handle. It was stuck, jammed tight. The windows, usually easy to open, were now impossibly stiff, as if sealed shut by an unseen force. He was cut off, truly isolated, trapped within the confines of his own home. As the day progressed, an unnatural thick fog began to roll in from outside, pressing against the windows. It was too dense for a Seattle autumn, clinging to the house like a living shroud. The air within the house grew even colder, a profound chill that made his teeth chatter despite his desperate attempts to build a small fire in the fireplace, which stubbornly refused to light. The strange earthy scent intensified, mixed with a metallic tang that made his nose burn, reminiscent of rusted iron and dried blood. The relentless psychological assault began to break David's sanity. He started seeing things in the swirling fog outside, or perhaps within the house itself. Fleeting, grotesque figures that darted through the corners of his vision. Distorted faces pressing against the glass, only to vanish when he looked directly. He screamed, his voice raw, at the shadows, at the whispers, at the unseen entity that stalked his home. Buster, sensing David's breakdown, whined and cowered, his usual loyalty replaced by a terrified, watchful gaze. One terrifying moment. As David stared out a fog-shrouded window, a large, dark hand, impossibly long and skeletal, pressed against the glass from the outside, its fingers splayed, leaving a chilling, clear imprint. It was too large to be human, its skin a mottled gray, its nails long and yellowed. He blinked hard, and it was gone, leaving only the lingering condensation and the cold dread of what he had just seen. The entity was not just a whisper. It was real, tactile, and actively trying to get in, driven by a desperate need to escape. David remembered the crawl space beneath his house, a small, rarely used access point near the back patio. He grabbed a flashlight and crawled towards it, Buster whimpering at his heels. As he opened the grate, a blast of icy, putrid air hit him, reeking of damp earth, decay, and something else. Something cloying and sweet, like stale funeral flowers. He peered into the darkness, the beam of his flashlight swallowed by the void. From the depths of the crawl space, a rhythmic, guttural sound began. A low, wet gurgle, followed by a faint, distorted humming. It was eerily familiar, almost like the sound a human voice would make trying to hum with a mouthful of liquid mud. It drew him in, a horrifying siren song emanating from the bowels of his own home. He felt a strange compulsion to enter, to discover. The source of the chilling melody. As David hesitated, the humming intensified, joined by what sounded like faint, childlike whimpers, echoing from the darkness beneath his home. Then, the crawl space opening, which had been a tight fit, seemed to expand, its edges rippling and stretching as if the earth around it were breathing. Dark root-like tendrils, impossibly thick and glistening with moisture, snaked out from the opening, testing the air, reaching towards him with a slow, deliberate hunger. The whispers from within the house suddenly coalesced, forming a unified, chilling chorus, no longer indistinct, but clear and precise, echoing from every wall. He comes for his walk. The floorboards above him groaned, and David heard heavy, dragging footsteps approaching from the hallway, impossibly close. He realized with a sickening lurch that whatever entity was beneath his house was now being drawn to the surface, summoned by the same unknown force that took Buster for his walks, and it was coming for him. The unified chant of "He comes for his walk" vibrated through the very foundations of the house, a terrifying crescendo that stole David's breath. He scrambled away from the pulsating crawl space, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The dragging footsteps in the hallway outside grew louder, slower, punctuated by wet, slurping sounds, announcing the presence of something vast and heavy. John, a primal terror gripping him, tried to push himself against the nearest wall, his mind reeling from the unyielding supernatural assault. The air in the house grew impossibly thick, filled with the cloying scent of decay and the metallic tang of fear. The walls pulsed with a faint, greenish luminescence, as if the very structure of his home was becoming sentient, breathing with a malevolent life. The scratch marks on the walls deepened, widening into grotesque fissures that revealed glimpses of something dark and writhing beneath the plaster. Every shadow seemed to stretch, to coalesce into fleeting, menacing shapes, mimicking the movements of an unseen predator. There was no longer any doubt of his isolation. The front door groaned, then buckled inward, revealing not the outside world, but a churning, amorphous wall of dark, wet earth and grasping roots. The windows were opaque with thick, creeping moss and thorny vines that had grown impossibly fast, completely obscuring any view. The house had become a living, self-contained prison, its every exit blocked by the earth itself, orchestrated by the malevolent entity that now stalked its halls. Nightfall brought a suffocating, unnatural darkness pierced only by the sickly green glow from the walls and the burning red light that now emanated from deep within the crawl space. The whispers from the walls intensified, forming clear, coherent phrases, not in any language David knew, but in a guttural, ancient tongue that vibrated directly in his mind, carrying messages of hunger, of territory, and of consumption. He was a trespasser in a place that now demanded his very being. The psychological toll was complete. David was a raw nerve, his mind fraying at the edges. He started talking to himself, pleading with the walls, begging the unseen entity for release. He saw flickering faces in the glowing fissures, distorted visages of previous owners, their eyes wide with perpetual horror, their mouths open in silent screams. Buster, meanwhile, had retreated into a state of terrified catatonia, his eyes fixed on the crawl space. A low, continuous whimper escaping him as David huddled in the corner, overwhelmed by the sensory assault. A grotesque, massive form began to push its way out of the crawl space. It was not a single entity, but a conglomeration of gnarled roots and dark soil, roughly humanoid in shape, with glowing red pinpricks of light for eyes. Its skin, or what appeared to be skin, was composed of tightly packed earth and moss, but it shimmered with an unsettling, almost wet quality. The creature slowly, deliberately, pulled itself free from the opening, revealing a terrifying, hulking mass that scraped across the floorboards. It moved with a horrifying, slow deliberation, each movement punctuated by wet sloshing sounds and the grinding of earth. David stumbled back, terror blinding him. The creature's head slowly rotated, its glowing red eyes fixing on him. From its formless mouth, a low, guttural voice, like rocks grinding together, resonated directly in his mind. "Hi, Shapino, you full filthy agredin." The entity then slowly extended a monstrous root-like hand towards him, its tendrils switching with an unnatural life. Driven by a desperate, illogical surge of defiance, David tried to remember anything, any clue from the obscure, invisible leash advertisement. Discreet, dedicated, divine. A connection to something ancient, spiritual. He suddenly remembered the faint, almost indiscernible symbols he had seen on the original ad image online. Symbols that looked eerily similar to ancient tribal markings. He frantically searched his memory for any more details, any weakness, any way to sever this terrifying connection. As the creature advanced, its shadowy form casting monstrous dancing figures on the glowing walls, David saw for a fleeting moment a glimmer of movement deep within its chest, a pulsing golden light. It was small, almost obscured by the mass of earth and roots, but unmistakable. And then he heard it, a faint, familiar whimper, muffled by the earth, but undeniably Buster. His dog wasn't being walked. He was being absorbed, his life force fueling this monstrous walker, his contentment part of the horrifying bargain. The revelation hit David with the force of a physical blow. The invisible leash wasn't a service. It was a parasitic entity, a living, earthbound horror that offered companionship and peace to lonely pets in exchange for their owners' homes, and eventually, their lives. And Buster, his beloved dog, was already a part of it, his absorbed essence the pulsing light within the creature's chest. The monster was almost upon him, its root-like hand reaching, its glowing red eyes fixing on his face with a chilling, possessive hunger. "Your turn." It rumbled in his mind, "to walk forever." The towering, earthbound entity loomed over David, its glowing red eyes burning into his soul, its root-like hand reaching for him. The muffled whimpers of Buster, trapped within its monstrous form, spurred a final, desperate surge of defiance. This wasn't just about escape anymore. It was about breaking the cycle, reclaiming his home, and freeing Buster from this grotesque, symbiotic nightmare. The whispers from the walls echoed, "Walk with us forever." But now David heard anew. Fainter voice, Buster's, urging him on. His mind raced. A frantic search for any weakness, any vulnerability in the seemingly invincible entity. The scrolls from the Pleasantville story, the idea of a covenant of stone, flickered through his thoughts. This wasn't stone, but earth. An elemental. It fed on life, on connection, on the very idea of home. But what if the connection could be severed, not by destruction, but by a forced severing of its anchor to the land itself? He remembered his own neglected life, his distance from nature, his reliance on convenience. The invisible service was a trap for those who outsourced their responsibilities. The house trembled, convulsing as the entity drew more power from the land. The walls bled more green bioluminescence, and the air crackled with a profound ancient energy. The creature's movements, slow and deliberate, now carried an immense weight, each step shaking the floorboards. David knew he had only moments. He focused on the faint golden light within the creature's chest, Buster's essence, the core of its parasitic power, and realized it was directly connected to the very ground beneath the house. A searing vision flooded David's mind, a horrifying realization of the entity's true nature. It wasn't just an elemental. It was the corrupted spirit of the land itself, fed by generations of forgotten care, of neglected homes, of isolated lives outsourcing their connection to nature. The invisible walks were how it expanded its territory, absorbing pets in there, owners into its network, turning suburban communities into sprawling, sentient nightmares, each house a new garden to cultivate. This home, Pleasantville, and now his own, were merely extensions of its growing hunger. With a guttural cry, David lunged, not at the monstrous creature, but towards the glowing fissure in the wall, the source of the roots and the green light. He tore at the remaining plaster with his bare hands, ignoring the sharp edges and the burning cold. He needed to get to the core, to whatever was generating that insidious green light. The creature roared, a sound of ancient rage, its root-like hand lashing out. But David was too fast, fueled by a primal need to save Buster. He reached the exposed earth within the wall, finding a pulsing, glowing green crystal nestled deep within the gnarled roots. It was the heart of the entity, the source of its power. He didn't know what to do, how to destroy it. But then, a thought, clear as a bell, echoed in his mind. Buster's thought. Water. The creature was earth. Water would corrode, would drown. David stumbled towards the kitchen, grabbing the largest pot he could find, and began to fill it with water from the tap, which, miraculously, was still running. The creature shrieked. Sensing his intent, its root-like tendrils flailing wildly, destroying the furniture around it. David poured the water directly onto the exposed crystal in the wall. A hiss like steam on hot stone erupted, followed by a blinding flash of green light. The creature convulsed, its massive form beginning to shrink, to crumble, as the water reacted with the crystal, causing it to crack and dissolve. The golden light within its chest flared then, with a final desperate pulse, vanished. The house groaned, a sound of agony, then relief. The noxious fumes cleared. The root-like tendrils withered and retracted back into the wall, leaving behind only crumbling plaster and damp earth. The gnomes outside, if they were still there, no longer glowed. The suffocating silence returned, but this time it was peaceful, no longer oppressive. David collapsed, gasping, covered in mud and sweat, but alive. And then, a soft whine from beside him. Buster, looking disoriented but whole, whimpered, licking David's face. He had been freed. They left the house that day, walking away from the ruined dream home, never looking back. David never spoke of what truly happened. His story dismissed as a mental breakdown from stress and a gas leak. He changed his career, embracing a simpler life, volunteering at animal shelters, spending every possible moment outdoors, connected to the natural world. He never owned another smart home device, and he walked Buster himself every single day. No matter the weather, years passed. David and Buster grew old together, their bond unbreakable. But sometimes, when David was walking Buster on a particularly damp, quiet evening, he would feel a faint, cool breeze and hear a whisper on the wind, a barely audible sibilant sound. It was the scent of damp earth and the cloying sweetness of decaying leaves. And then he would see it, a tiny, almost invisible crack in the sidewalk, extending, slowly, subtly, toward his feet. He had defeated the creature in his home, but the earth had a long memory, and the invisible leash was always searching for a new path, a new connection, slowly, inevitably, expanding its silent, invisible network across every neglected patch of suburban land.